Hello and welcome to Breaking into Hollywood, the Master Course. If you heard that little whistling, it was our special guest tonight. So happy to be here with us that he gave us a little introduction himself. But I'm going to leave the proper introduction to Gary W. Goldstein. Again, welcome to Breaking into Hollywood. This is our 4th show. I can't believe we've done so many so far. It's gone so quickly. Gary, we only launched this 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. It's crazy.
It's nuts.
It's absolutely crazy. So the first week we had on a guest, Michael Shipley, writer and producer, funny as hell. If you didn't catch that interview, go to the YouTube channel and catch that. Then we had Christopher Kubasik, completely different kind of person in the same industry, screenwriter, director, but it's so interesting to see how all these personalities are so different in the way that they work. Last week's show, Stacey Miller's actually in the winning of how many people have been viewing her show. She has got racked up hundreds of them. Screenwriter and actress, she was amazing last week. It was an absolute delight to get to know her. So I'm going to introduce you over to Gary Goldstein, who's going to introduce you to someone that Stacey knows very well. Gary, how are you this week?
I am wonderful. Thank you, Bethan. And by the way, let's introduce Bethan Davies, who's producing all this madness, who is largely single-handedly responsible. If you can imagine building a community from scratch starting less than a month ago, and we've got 44 videos, I think, plus on YouTube already from these rock star guests, and it's crazy the amount of traffic and comment and involvement. So that's a beautiful thing. So Bethan, thank you for that.
Thank you.
And by the way, you know, tonight we've got David Garrett. I'm going to tell you about this guy because he's a wacky guy. But I'm going to introduce him in a second. But what I'm going to encourage you to do is, because the people we're getting are so amazing, like David, go to breakingintohollywood.com, drop your name and email in there. We're going to keep you all abreast of every upcoming guest, all where you're going to find the videos after the fact, etc., and all sorts of other fun stuff. So do that when you have a moment. In the meantime, let's get down to brass tacks with David Garrett. David Garrett, I actually have only met very, very recently. First over the phone through wonderful mutual acquaintance, and then in person. And I'm going to read you his bio, and then I'm going to editorialize. So, so buckle your seatbelts. David Garrett, writer-producer, that's what you need. This man is a very prolific writer-producer. David has written feature films, and I've got to check my notes here, for DreamWorks, Universal, and Paramount. He co-wrote Foreign Exchange for MTV Films and the musical comedy Do That to Me One More Time with Jack Black for Touchstone Pictures. He's co-written Deuce Bigalow, European Gigolo for Happy Madison, as well as First Pet and Corky Romano for both feature films for Disney. And in 2012, David directed and produced the award-winning political documentary Who is Alvin Green? So, going back a little bit, while Vice President of Development at Intrigue Entertainment, David specialized in bringing foreign formats to the American TV market. Between 2011 and 2013, David set up the Turkish format Game of Silence with NBC, the Chilean format First Lady with Warner Brothers, and the Israeli format The Quadruplets with CBS, which is a whole other fascinating. We've got to get into that. That's amazing.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Yeah, that's brilliant stuff. In addition, David set up multiple Brazilian and Colombian formats with Universal Cable Television. He's also sold several scripted pilots, including Speak of the Devil for ABC Family, Inland Empire for Universal, and Former Fat Girl, now in production at NBC. Congratulations on that. That's huge. Previously, David wrote and produced pilot series and specials for ABC, NBC, CBS, UPN, MTV, USA, the whole alphabet, basically. Comedy Central, Showtime, and Fox. And in 2010, he sold the half-hour comedy The Ugly Florida USA, the reality show I've Never, to MTV. And his Living with Fran for the WB, he co-created and executive produced, and it was based on his own life. David
and
also.
Now he has to leave because he has to get back to work.
Exactly. This is a man on a mission, we could say that. So, okay, finally, the half-hour comedy model Family, sold to Fox with Jamie Kennedy, co-wrote The Hatfields and the McCoys, a dramatic miniseries for USA Network, and has had development deals with Fox Television, Paramount Television, and Touchstone. David has and continues to lecture on screenwriting at New York Film Academy, UCLA, USC, Columbia College, and film festivals around the world. He's an attorney. a dubious distinction we share in common, and graduate of UCLA Law School. So he's clearly far too credentialed and pedigreed and resume to be on this show. Nonetheless, David, welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And the one thing you did, I didn't put on my resume was my Razzie nomination.
Oh, what was that for?
That was yeah, that was for Deuce Bigalow in 2005. But you know, I like to throw in the bad with the good.
Anyone who's gotten a Razzie or a Rotten Tomato is okay in my book.
Okay, great.
We all have to have humble beginnings, you know, and we appreciate those. So, David, you know, the fact that you're only 16 years old, I have to ask the question. You know, this is like a parchment scroll that just goes on and on and on. So, you're a writer, you're a producer. First, let's go back in time. How did you get into this? Where did you begin? And how did you frame up your entry into what's already a pretty interesting career?
You know, that's a good question. And looking back, thinking about coming on today, I realized it's working with partners has helped me get into the business. And the way I got into the business originally, I was an attorney. I was working at a production company, and I didn't really like the legal part, but I liked interacting with the writers and with the directors and the producers coming in, and I started reading all the scripts that were coming in. And eventually I said, you know what, I can write one of these. So I started grabbing the writers as they were coming in for meetings and pulling them in my office and saying, hey, I want to write screenplays. Let's write together. And so I hooked up with a guy named Brian Sawyer, who's now a very successful TV writer, and we wrote a screenplay, and and he was a film school guy, so he sort of taught me structure and taught me how to do it, and then you know we sold that screenplay, and that's how I got into the business.
We could teach an entire semester curriculum on what you just said. Seriously, that is so brilliant. So can we backtrack just for a moment?
Sure.
You know, it does not matter what the entry point is. We're both lawyers. We have that in common. Law wasn't what ultimately lit us up. Mm-hmm. But what a fabulous, any entry point, any legitimate basis for a conversation is a beautiful inroad. So you found yourself in, you know, I mean, we've often talked. Well, let me back up. David and I met. How did we meet? We met because through a mutual friend who was who graduated your course. David and his off-time collaborator, Stacy Miller, our recent guest, rock star, teach for Studio 4, amongst others, Columbia College, Studio 4. They teach all over the place because they're very brilliant at this. Studio 4 is the new extension sort of arm of Playhouse West run by James Franco and his partner, and you are premier faculty. So I came and taught one evening with you, which was a blast.
It was great.
It was pretty special. The level of the caliber of dialogue and exchange is really to be admired. So I'm so grateful that we're having you as our guest. So one of the things that we talked about that evening was it really does not matter if you end up trying to get into if you want to be a writer, a staff writer on a TV show. It's very legitimate to say I just want to be a set PA so that I can become familiar to the writers who come and go. And eventually maybe get hired as an assistant to a writer. Now I'm in the room, and then eventually get hired to write a script. It's such a relationship-driven business. So to put yourself in that crosshairs of proximity to all those writers that you could collaborate with, learn from, extend yourself through their map of relationships, I mean, that's a whole mandala of success right there, yes?
Yes, and it's relationship driven, but also it's crisis driven, and you can take advantage of the crisis. And the crisis is, we have to have a script done this week. Who's going to write it? And literally, sometimes I've been in rooms and they're like, we need you to write this script. And it's the proximity of being there where things are happening, even if you're not on the writing staff, you're a writing assistant, you're a PA. Someone has to get this done, and it's throwing yourself in there, meeting people and treating people well will get you a very long way.
You remind me of the wonderful quote, Ari Emanuel, who everyone knows from Entourage, yes? Mm-hmm. His brother Ram, mayor of Chicago, always had this famous quote, never let a good crisis go to waste.
I've heard it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's the way to do it. Is just you just have to realize that it's a business where a lot of things happen really quickly, and they need someone to get the job done. And if you're there and you can get it done, and they know you because, oh, this guy was a good PA, this guy was a good producer, this guy was a good whatever, we can depend on him. You know what? Let him write the script, and it happens.
So when you first started creating these so-called partnerships while you were a law firm at a production company, what year? Set us in time. How far back are we?
It was 1996.
Okay, so it's almost 2 decades. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, at what point did you become a full? So you focused initially on writing, and when did you become sort of a full-time writer?
It took me 2 years from the time I sold the first script to jump into full-time writing. And what I wanted to do is, because I hadn't been to film school, I knew I needed to learn the craft. So I would choose people, I would find brilliant writers and say, please help me learn how to write. And I would sit down with them and teach me how to write. And you know what? I'm going to help you. If we get a deal, I'm going to help you make a good deal. We're going to make a good deal on this script. And so I said, I'm going to give something back. Teach me how to write. And that was, that's how I met 2 or 3 great writers, and that's how I learned how to write.
David, I'm going to jump in with a question. Arissa is saying, any tips on collaborating? I think you partly answered that, but if you could say maybe a bit clearer to choose people that can fill in holes that you don't, knowledge you don't possess.
Exactly. There's a couple of things I've learned from collaborating. One is you want to get someone who complements what you already do. And me, I'm like the meat and potatoes guy. I'll sit down, I'll do the structure, I will do the work that needs to be done. But sometimes, you know what, I don't have the inspiration. And so I look for people that have inspiration, the people that are sort of the dreamers who, they're not going to sit down and type unless you grab them and physically just put their hands on the keyboard and move them up and down. And I've had writing partners like that. But that's what I do because I'm the responsible person. And to be quite honest, I'll find the irresponsible guy who's really, really talented. He just needs some direction. I also like to collaborate with young writers, and I know Gary mentioned that I teach a lot of classes, and part of it is selfish because I get to meet a whole crop of new young writers with great ideas. And many times, after a class is done, I'll pull a writer aside and say, you know what, I really like that idea you have. Let's collaborate, or let me help you produce your project, or let me introduce you to some people. And it's just a way to keep my weaknesses from hurting me, and it's if that makes sense.
Yeah, very clever.
And one other thing really quick on the partnerships, the flip side of that, and I've been in this situation, if you write with a partner long enough, then people will start associating you with that partner. So if you write with someone for 5 years and you sell a bunch of projects, then you're Garrett and whoever. And you have to be careful because then you can get locked into that partnership, and if the partnership breaks up, then you're back to being just half of a broken up partnership. So it's important, and if you look at sort of the Weitz brothers or the Coen brothers, they work together on a lot of things, but then separately they'll go off and do their own passion projects because it keeps them feeling fresh, and it also keeps them from just being tied into this strict partnership that only does one type of project.
Yeah, and the alternative, I agree wholeheartedly. You want to frame yourself up in a way where you're always employable and attractive.
Yes.
And sometimes that's writing on your own outside of a partnership, and sometimes it's at what you do, frankly, which is having multiple partners and constantly refreshing a new set of relationships and ideas and script opportunities. I think that's really good advice. Partnerships are sometimes wonderful, and sometimes they don't endure.
Sure. Like relationships.
Kind of like all human relationships.
Well, they are relationships. They're like marriages, and if you have a writing partner long enough and you do enough projects, when you break up your partnership, you have to have a dissolution agreement. Literally, it's like a divorce, and you sit down and you have a lawyer divide up your partnerships. And it's important that you have to keep yourself established as an individual, as a writer. So you don't want to depend on anybody else. So it's sort of it's a little give and take there.
So I'm going to take advantage of you, David, because you have a legal background. So we're on partnership, which is a really interesting, and let's expand that idea into collaboration, not just a formal writing partnership, although they're different. One of the things I notice is that at the beginning of any relationship or any opportunity of collaborative opportunity, it's a honeymoon period. Everyone's excited, everyone's looking forward, everyone sees great, big, wonderful outcomes. And hopefully that's the case. That said, I find many creatives and many human beings are so enamored of the possibility before them that they forget to ask some very fundamental groundstroke kinds of questions like, what if, you know? And so do you encourage, and for your own sake, if you collaborate with one of your students, is a good example, do you have some kind of understanding, either verbal and or written, about you know, how that script is going to be treated, who's going to represent it, who gets to make decisions, what if there's a sort of a stalemate, if you will? Do you have ground rules or rules of engagement when you collaborate?
Sure. You always want those rules of engagement, because otherwise it can get messy legally, and it can, you know, people's feelings can be hurt, and there's misunderstandings. You know, you want to set out up front, and it's a lot easier up front to lay out what you're doing. You know, if you're writing one script with someone and it's based, like I've written a script with someone and it's based on his idea, and so our deal was he got 60% of any money we made, I got 40%, and when it came down to veto power, we agreed to let him have veto power over any major creative issues. And I just said, you know what, you can have that. If it was reversed and I optioned a book that we were going to write a script based on, then I might say, look, I want the veto power on this, or we'll have a third party, we'll have the book author decide. And so you want to have a mechanism in place to solve problems. Otherwise, you know, you go, a deal happens, or something happens where there's just a stalemate, and the partnership looks unprofessional, because in the eyes of someone who wants to option your project or buy it, you're just these two bickering children rather than a partnership that knows the business.
Yeah, or if not bickering, you look uncertainly at one another with no answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's just wisdom at the outset, and in fact, I find it makes for stronger relationships if you do have some clarity up front. And it doesn't matter what the solution mechanism is, if it's equal, different, a third party, as long as you have that in place, and everybody tends to benefit just from having had that conversation. So,
and the other thing, can I throw one other point? The other thing is, there's also, you know, when I started out, I used to fight. I want to be the decision maker. I want to control it. But then I started realizing there's such there's a great freedom in not having to be that person, and just saying, you know what, if we have a problem, you decide. And I've done that before, and it sort of takes the pressure off, and it makes it a lot easier to be creative than having two people fight.
I agree with that. I think it also is just an honest assessment of your different skill sets and what you enjoy. Both. Those are different. You know, in your case, you have some legal background. You've lived inside of a production company. It may be that you have certain representation or certain negotiating skills or certain relationships. Whatever those different things, you just throw them on the table and you weigh them out and say, who's best at what piece of this relationship?
Sure.
And I think that kind of transparency, you know, is very freeing. So, David, in your the intersection of all that you've done, because you have an inordinate amount of you've achieved a lot in a rather short amount of time, honestly, given these credits. When you look at the students that you teach and what your experience is and how the business, what are some of the more crucial things that come up, sort of the common concerns or things that you feel important for for a young creative, a writer today in today's market to strategically be thinking about as they enter into their career?
That's a great question. And what I like to emphasize is there's two aspects to your writing. There's the creative side, the dreams, the passion project you have. Then there's the reality of the market. And you have to decide how you're going to weigh those. It can be 100% your creative passion. It can be 100% the market. But if you want to succeed and have a career, there's got to be some mix that's fairly even in that. And that's saying, for example, someone is writing. If you're writing a script that at this point the market isn't going to bear, but you know what? That doesn't mean it's not a valuable script or a great project. Write it, put it aside for a couple of years, and then in a couple of years, westerns are going to come back around. It might be all sci-fi this year. It could be it's all teen girl, Hunger Games, Twilight movies. But you know what? You're going to be the counter programming, and you're going to have the other type of project that's going to be ready when someone, an agent, or I've read every movie like this. I need a movie like this. You're going to have that script. So it's pursuing your passion, but with the realities of the business.
And I would just add, because in the business is shifting. The business is always in flux and changing. Appetites are changing and recycling, certainly. One of the things that I've noticed with some frequency over the years is that sometimes the script you least expect, or the script that one might describe as the least marketable at that moment in time, the least commercial by general consensus, is surprisingly effective, not as a property to be financed and produced in that moment, but as a career launching tool, because it is so undeniably unique and strong and beautifully written, and certainly out of lockstep with what's being made.
Yeah.
But people are always looking for that raw talent that can be reapplied in the service of a new idea.
And that's a really good point. 2 points about that is, I always talk to executives who come to speak to my classes, which is sort of my secret way of meeting executives, is getting them to come talk to the classes. and they always say, you know what, I don't care what the story is in the screenplay. I'm looking for the writer's style. I want to open up a script and go, you know what, this is a Beth and Davy script, as opposed to this story. This is a script that Bethan would write, because then in their heads, for every assignment that comes along, they start thinking of you for that type of assignment. And that's how you get the jobs. The second thing is, whatever movie last weekend was #1, every person on the planet, every agent is submitting scripts just like that movie for the next 2 weeks. So if Hunger Games was #1, all the Hunger Games type movies are going to be submitted. And then it's sort of great if an agent calls up, or you bump into somebody and say, hey, I have a script that's not like that at all. And they're going to be relieved to say, okay, great, finally, a script that's not that type of script, and they might read it or be more likely to like it because it feels fresh.
I remember well a time when we were so elated anytime someone said, I'm sending you a script, and it's not Die Hard in a fill in the blank.
Exactly.
Yeah, amen. So tell me how you segued from the writing to both things, from writing to producing in general, but I'd also like you to comment, because I think it's really interesting. I don't know if a lot of people really deeply understand this whole concept of formats and the producing mind that understands how do I identify them, what you're looking for, and what it means to import a format.
Great, that's a great question. The moment I started transitioning was during the writer's strike. I remember 2008. I'm out picketing in front of Universal, and I'm walking around, and during the next few months, the studios just sort of said, you know what, we don't even need writers. We're just going to go in our library and start pulling out properties, and they just would pull out scripts. Oh, here's Nightmare on Elm Street from the 80s. We'll just change Sony Walkman to iPod, and we'll just reshoot it. And I started realizing that I had to add some other value other than being a writer at that point. And so I decided I was going to go out and start looking for properties, and that's when I went out and started looking for books. And formats are important because it gives something for the executives to latch onto, something to help them sell upwards. Because you have to realize when you're pitching to executives, most of them can't buy the project. They have to pitch it upwards in the company. So a format gives them something they can take into their boss's office and say, look, this movie, this TV show was the #1 show in Argentina for 3 years. I think it's going to work here. And you might say, well, I'm just a writer, sitting at home. How am I going to get a format? I tell you, you can get them.
Well, that's the Ugly Betty story, isn't it?
Yeah, that's. Mm-hmm.
And it's happening across, and people should understand this is an equal opportunity. It is true. It is surprising. It's kind of like the college professor, and no one calls on the college professor because they think the college professor is too busy, and the professor's just waiting for someone to please come knock on my door and ask me a question. There are imagine how many TV shows in America we go through on a seasonal basis. Many that do very, very well. The same is true in Europe, the same is true in South America, the same is true in Asia. All over the world, there's this massive amount of content with great performance histories, pulling big shares and big audiences consistently over a multiple of seasons. And those kinds of, as you say, empirical data that you bring, saying not only does it look, is it a great storyline, a great setup, but here's how it performs. We could do this here. And that's true in scripted, or what we call scripted and unscripted, reality and dramatic programming. And it's an analogy to what you're talking about as well, essentially in what the studios were doing by recycling feature content.
And also, you have to realize in other countries, the writers, the creators have a lot more power, so often they get to keep the rights to their shows. So it's not, to them, it's not about how much money someone offers, it's the personal relationship. And you can track down, I've tracked down old shows from the UK and found the creators online and sent them an email and said, I really like your show, what's happening with it? Well, it's just, I have the rights, it's just sitting there. And you can do that. You have to believe that, and the other thing to think about is you have viewers from all over the world. If you're in Australia, if you're in South America, if you're in Hungary, look on TV and go, what show is popular here, or what show is under the radar, and go and try to get those rights and then bring them over.
Yeah, and that would be true whether you're primarily wearing the hat of a writer or a producer, because it's opportunity. Yeah.
Exactly. And as a writer, you have more power because the one thing you have to do with formats is you take a format from another country, you have to repurpose it and pitch it here as to the network and tell them what the series will be. So as a writer, that's an opportunity to be creative, and you can create the series as you would see it on the U.S. network or whatever network.
So, David, changing subject just a little bit, looking at your credentials, both on the feature side and on the television side, whether it's Corky Romano and Deuce Bigalow, whether it's the Jeff Foxworthy Show, and all these, so many of these are half-hour or comedy-based projects. I'm just fascinated to ask, was that a conscious, was that based on just your personal aesthetic? You love comedy, you enjoy watching them and writing them, and it's fun for you, or was there a strategic piece to that being on that sort of trajectory?
That's a good question. I'll tell you, when I first moved to LA, I was in law school. I would go to...
Which is, by the way, a very funny place.
Yeah, I would go out to comedy clubs every night and do stand-up. And what would happen, because I wanted to be a comedian, and I would get very few laughs. But the other comics would come up to me and they would go, you know what, your delivery is terrible, but I see where that joke is going. Can I have that joke? I think I can do that. And so I started selling jokes to comedians, and then I started realizing, maybe I'm a writer, not a comedian. And that's how I ended up doing comedy.
Can I ask a question about, you were talking about that in the classes that you run, that you find students that you want to work with, is there something in particular that they show at a certain age or a certain, I don't know, what is the je ne sais quoi that you're looking for that makes you want to work with somebody? Because I'm sure that's what people out here are wanting to do, is to find someone like you that they're going to be able to partner up with.
Sure, and what it is, it's I can tell you what it is, but it's hard to quantify. You have to have an original idea that has identifiable elements that feel familiar. So when someone has, it's just a very fine line from, and I'm trying to explain it. It's just a fresh approach to something that hasn't been done before. That's exactly what you look at, and you hear it. And when you hear the students pitch something, and everyone in the class, their ears perk up, and they're like, "Yeah, I get that." After 2 sentences, you're like, "That's a great idea." If a person talks for 5 minutes and you don't know what's happening, you know it's not like that. But it's just a fresh idea that immediately pops.
And do you have a wide range, if someone's asking, a wide range of ages that you work with, or are these usually younger people?
You know what? I don't discriminate. I look for people with a fresh perspective, and I think you can have a fresh perspective at any age. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, being young and not knowing what the rules are, that's great. That gives you a fresh perspective. But also a person who's gone through their entire career, they've retired, and then they're at the other end. They have a view of life that only they can write about, and that's something with the population's aging now. So you've got to you can't limit yourself, especially if you're a writer. You can be 25, you can be 65. There's a Spanish director who's 104 years old, and he's done. When he turned, I saw that, and I have to look up his name. When he turned 70, he started directing movies, and he's directed 30 movies up to age 104.
Oh my Lord!
So I'm going to look it up and tell you guys who he is.
Great.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
David, further to Bethan's question, which I think is an exquisite question, and I think it's one that people often ask themselves. The other, now you're in a specific environment. A lot of these people, not all, but certainly the students, you're getting to know them, you're meeting them, you're proximate to them, you're in the room with them literally. You get to sense their personality, their energy, their presentation skills, all that stuff, as well as their actual craft and their pitch. Mm-hmm. I think something that's always fascinated me is to what extent personality, style, presence, enthusiasm, likability, all of those kinds of non-story-based pieces factor into how attractive you are toward a potential partnership or collaboration.
Okay, well, there's 2 ways to look at it. If someone has a fantastic script that's ready to go, and they're the biggest jerk on the planet, that's fine. I don't care. You can be a big jerk, but if I need to sit down and collaborate with someone and come up with an idea and go pitch it and do all that, you really want to work with someone that is going to be easy to work with, and not saying you want that you have to be a pushover. It's that you want to understand the process and not take it personally. If someone says, how about this character? What would you think if this character, or this instead of setting the movie in the 70s, what if we made it, set it now? So we could the budget would be lower. You want to be open to ideas and not greet them with hostility, which many writers, oh no, this could never be a contemporary movie because X, Y, Z, as opposed to, what, let me think about that. I'm going to think about that and see if that works. And that's the type of person who has a nimble sort of mind that's a good collaborator.
We have the answer to your guy. His name is from Tierra Films. Hello, thank you, Manuel Candido Pinto de Oliveira. That sound right,
That's it.
David?
Yes, that's him. And I'm right, that he is 100. He, he is 105 years old.
Jeez. I just love the fact, especially with the kind of audience that we're having here, that it's never too late. You
Yeah.
always have a story, and whatever part of life you're in, you've got that extra story. And even if you're not at retirement age, but you're finished with this part of your career and want to move on to something different, don't worry about that you're not 17 and starting out in college.
Yeah. Don't worry about it, because you have to realize starting out, you're actually more valuable to the studios because they can pay you less. And I know that sounds, sounds bad, but it's true. If you're just starting out, whether you're out of film school or whether you're 50 years old and writing your first screenplay, the studios know they can have a bargain if they buy your screenplay. And so, you have to use that to your advantage. Use your outsider status to your advantage. Use if you're foreign, you have an accent, whatever it is that you do, you need to use that to your advantage and play that up. And walk in and say, you know what, I'm not from Hollywood. I'm not a big city person, but you know what, I'm from Middle America, and I know what Middle America likes, and Middle America will like this story, or whatever it is that, I'm not from the U.S., but I do know that 50% of the box office is outside the U.S., and having lived in China for 10 years, I know that they're looking for this type of movie. And you spend your personal experience to get them on board with what you're selling.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. There's two things. One piece of that is Hollywood lives on a steady diet of discovery. They are craving to discover the next fresh, new voice, talent, personality, whatever you want to call it. That all that is. And sometimes that does come at a younger age because you're unknown. So you're automatically with that sort of ace up your sleeve, which would seem like a disadvantage to many, but it's really not. But the bigger version of that, which I find fascinating, is that most people have the most amazing personal story imaginable. They're human beings with just all this rich experience, and they don't share that story. They take it for granted. But if you could pull those pearls out of them, they would mesmerize people.
Yeah.
And then if you happen to have anything really crazy in your life, could be a relative, but if you have something crazy in your life, this is like gold. I remember many years ago I was starting out, and I was new, I was unknown, and I met a couple of writers. One was a real crafted, a beautiful storyteller, a real classic writer, and his partner was the guy that never sat, didn't know what a keyboard was. He was the guy pacing the room with the idea, and it was often based on real life, and the reason is because he'd been I was going to say professional, I don't know if there is such a thing, a bank robber. And he had robbed many banks, but he was not very good, as I found out.
A terrible bank robber.
Well, he was not very successful bank robber. He robbed a lot of banks, and I said, wait a minute, you did 9 years in the federal penitentiary system. So how many robberies did you do, and what was your total take? And I'm going to do the math, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to score you as a bank robber. And he was not a good bank robber. He didn't make much money. So he did 9 years. But here's the beautiful thing. Did it matter? He made up for it by making his money in Hollywood. Why? Because there are not a lot of would-be writers who come here and say, yeah, I just got out of jail. I've robbed banks all my life. I've been 9 years in the pen. Every office in town wanted to meet this guy.
Exactly.
He had 75 meetings with his partner in 3 months just because of that.
Yeah. I think you two, as lawyers, need to put a disclaimer. We do not advise robbing banks to get a movie deal. Someone's got to say that soon before someone goes out.
Yeah,
exactly. We're getting a lot of comments about this age thing. So if there's anything else you can say about that, they're loving it. They're saying,
oh, great.
People have been told that they're too old to start. I think people sometimes, you're not going to be Britney Spears if you're 57 years old, but being a writer, you're not in the front, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is you can't limit yourself because all they care about is how good the script is. If someone picks up, I guarantee you, no one picks up a script and says, so-and-so by so-and-so, age 15, age 37. No, the scripts don't say that. It's just whatever's on the page. If it's on the page, they're gonna do it. And I understand that, the difficult part is this is and why it's sort of skewed toward younger people is, 23-year-olds come out here. They spend every night going to bars and clubs and parties and hanging out with Hollywood people. And if you're, not in Hollywood, it sort of seems like, oh, that's an uphill battle because I'm not there every night in somebody's face meeting them. But you know what? If you write a good script, it will get to the right people. It'll win those contests, and people will find it.
Yeah, this is a town where people read, share, and talk. There's a wonderful, David, I don't know if you know, are you familiar with Catherine Hardwicke?
Yes.
So Catherine started out, she was a great sculptor. She was a production designer. She got into the movie business as a production designer. Really lovely gal. And then years later, quite a number of years later, she segued and broke into being a filmmaker, a director. And she did that with a little script called 13. And 13 was, actually, I believe it's correct to say that she collaborated on the story. I don't know about the writing, but the story was really quite based on true story of her niece. So she and her niece collaborated on that story. She directed that film. And what was beautiful about that was it didn't matter that she never directed, it didn't matter that she never written, it mattered that the story was so unique and authentic and true and compelling to people. And now Catherine went on, and I won't list her credits because I can't remember them all, but certainly it leads up to and through Twilight.
Sure.
Pretty impressive. So I think that your background, where you're from, your age, I agree with everything that you're saying. I think if the story lights people up, that's the brass ring.
Yeah, and just use whatever, like when I went in to interview for Jeff Foxworthy, for that show, I'd never worked on any sitcoms before. I had no credits, but I was from, a small town in Texas, so before my interview, I flew down to Texas, and I talked to my mom, and I said, Mom, tell me some things about being, because she was from a really small town. Tell me some great stories. And she told me some great stories about what they used to do on the farm. And I went into the interview and I said, look, I'm not going to try to sell myself, but I'm going to show you this is what I have access to. And I played the tape recorder of my mom telling these great stories about chasing huge rats around the barn with a baseball bat, and just things like really in the just crazy things they would used to do on growing up on a farm. And they're like, that's great. We need some good redneck stories on the show, and they hired me. And it just you have to use where you come from and what you have, to your advantage.
And that's the most natural thing to talk about. David, we're running through this hour so quickly. We ask every guest, do you remember the moment that you thought to yourself, I've made this, I've done this, I've actually made it, broken into Hollywood?
Oh, well, I remember when the first movie that I got greenlit was a Disney movie, and the producer called me because we turned in, it was really a really fast turnaround. We wrote the script in 10 days, we turned it in on a Friday, and on Monday the producer called me and he said, what's your favorite color? And I was like, I don't know, blue? He's like, no, green, idiot. Your movie got greenlit. And I was like, oh, because I was just so naive. I didn't. And then, but he said, but here's, you'll never be satisfied again because this is going to be the best moment of your life. And it's sort of like because your expectations are so high, it's just an up and down thing. But that was a good moment. I was like, blue, green. Oh yeah, green. So that was fun.
David, go ahead, Bethan. Go ahead.
How long had you been working to get to that moment?
I've been writing about 5 years, or been writing professionally for 5 years. But it's one of those things where it just you build up to it, then all of a sudden it just happens really fast. You're waiting, and literally turn in the script on Friday. On Monday it's greenlit, and then we're shooting in 6 weeks, and it just happens that way sometimes.
So exciting. So exciting for someone.
David, one of the other questions that we like to ask people, our guests, is if you were to write a letter and offer some counsel or wisdom, strategy, whatever you want to call it, to your 18-year-old self who is facing this direction with these creative aspirations, what would you write to yourself?
I think I would just write more than I wrote. I would not focus, because back in the earlier days, I would pick one project and write it and try to perfect it over a 6-month period, 9 months. But now I realize, it's when I write a script, it's 87 to 90% there in the first draft or second draft. I can tinker with it, and it's going to change a little bit, but it's basically the concept is there, the feeling is there, that I'd be better off moving on and writing another script and then coming back to that one rather than spending 6 months just going through the over and over trying to make it perfect and fixing all the things that most people don't notice anyway. It's just, when people read a script, it's a feeling they get. It's not it's not a logical feeling. It's not something logical. It's like a visceral feeling. And either when you do that draft, it's there or not, you might as well move on to the next one and keep going. So I would just say write more.
For people who aren't in Hollywood or don't have connections with people in Hollywood, and they have a script that they really believe in, what do those kind of people do? Where would they turn to? That's a question for both of you, Gary and David.
I definitely have some thoughts on that.
Dive in.
Yeah. Contests are great, especially contests associated with great film festivals. Because, like, for example, the Austin Film Festival, what they do is they have it's a screenwriter centric film festival. They have a contest where a certain amount of people who place in a certain rank get to come out and meet filmmakers and meet executives. And so if you get the top quarter or whatever, then you get to have a roundtable meeting with executives and producers. And I met a lot of writers through that who I ended up meeting with out here, developing some projects with. And contests are great because if you win one, you're going to get noticed. If you place in one, you still can put that on your resume. And if you place in 8 contests with 3 different scripts, people are going to go, you know what, maybe she knows what she's doing.
I would agree with that. I would tell you that my entire producing career really launched off that simple idea, because I had a script by an unknown writer and I was a relatively unknown producer at the time, and I took it to the Sundance Production Lab, which is not a well-known. It certainly wasn't at the time. It was new, but it had a lot of people in Hollywood. People in Hollywood pay attention to these things. They actually are looking for these sort of hubs of discovery. And like David said, they all have a different signature, but that's known to the people in Hollywood. Austin might be a little writer-centric. Different ones are different. Sundance was the production lab was a wonderful opportunity to get a lot of notice out of Hollywood while working on the script and bettering the story with A-list what they call free resource people. I had Paul Hirsch, the editor of Star Wars and 40 other brilliant films, whispering creative notes in my young green ear. I thought I died and gone to heaven. So that project, which became Pretty Woman, was otherwise titled at the time, really got traction and notice because we entered it into exactly the kind of environment David's describing. So that's definitely one of the things. The other thing that I would say is it's not even reliant necessarily on the particular script. Like recently I was at this a particular event. I won't promote it, but I was at a particular event, and it was part event and part with a lot of people like David and really wonderful people coming to speak and share their wisdom from the stage. And then there was a last piece at the end, the last day I believe it was, that was a pitch fest. And while the pitch fest was sold out well in advance, because they capped the number of, I think it was 500 people could pitch to 140 production companies or producers. But the 2 days before, I looked at the lineup of people who were there, the producers, the writers, and my jaw hit the ground. Like, I went and spent all 2 days just so I could network with all of those people.
Right.
And what's fascinating is that those rooms were by no means full. And if I were a writer, if I could get my butt to, in this case it was in Burbank, but I don't care if it's back east, I don't care if it's in Dallas, I don't care if it's in LA, it doesn't matter where it is, Chicago. If I could find a hub where there's an event where people like that are showing up, and they often show up also at these festivals, there are all kinds of roundtables, Toronto's, and you name it. I would do anything I could to be face-to-face, knee-to-knee, not necessarily at a pitch fest. I would go to these events where they're speaking and approach them before, during, after. There's not, and there's so many ways to get pearls out of them and beginning rapport out of them by saying, you know, I really admire your work. I have a question. Would you be my 5-minute mentor? There's so many little tricks to this that are honest. So I think, you know, just showing. Was it Woody Allen who said 90% of success is just showing up?
Yeah. And
David,
the other thing about
No, you go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Oh no, the other thing about going to film festivals and going to these events is, you know, and it might not even happen overnight, but I know people that go to South by Southwest, Austin Film Festival. They see the same executive every year for 3 years, and the third year, the first year they were walking up and introducing themselves. By the third year, the executive was recognizing them and waving to them, and they were, you know, sometimes it takes 2 years to have a relationship form, but you know, then it starts. There's a familiarity and a trust, and then you can finally go, hey, I have a script for you to read. It doesn't happen overnight.
David, let me ask you one quick question. And this hour's just zoomed past. It's impossible. We've just got warmed up. But in your experience, or in the experience of your students, equally relevant, do people effectively use a lot of social platforms for finding collaborators or networking in general?
Do they? Are you? I think a lot of times people misuse them because some people post so much negative stuff, political things like that, that shows up, and then, you know, you can end up alienating people before you even meet them. And I'm not that type of person because I like all points of view. But there's some type of people who will look and go, oh, they're against that or for that or whatever. So you have to really be careful when you're out there. You know, when you write something on Facebook and post some offensive thing, which people do, you have to be careful of who's going to see it and how people will view you, unless that's the persona you're trying to
the
create.
iconoclast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not what I was. It's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's really important. I was thinking more about people who generally go into these screenwriting or filmmaking groups within those environments to legitimately have a serious talk about the craft and meet one another and exchange ideas.
I think that's very important. I think it's very important, and I think it's very useful just to get out there and just to be a part of it.
We've got a question that just come in. Is pitching a skill, which fits in right with what you're going with, Gary? A Google Plus, I can't think of the word, sorry, gallery like this is a great way to practice your pitch. You can hang out with anybody, you know, and go over it and refine it and go over it and make sure they like it. And, you know, there's all kinds of different things you can do on social media.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that should be, that should not be underestimated. I think that always get better as storytellers, oral storytellers, and that's so compelling in this business. So I think, yeah, whether you're alone or looking into a mirror or talking to one friend or getting 3 friends in person, or being in a hangout, which is a beautiful live environment to see real-time reaction. It's hard for people to do, but the more you do it, the more you practice, the more you're rewarded, I believe.
And even, you know, what we're doing right now, this is helping me be more comfortable and just to get out there and you know, and talk, and because it's uncomfortable for most 98% of people. It's an uncomfortable experience to have to put yourself in front of people you don't know and try to sell something and sell yourself. So the more you can put yourself in that position till you get comfortable with it, then the better off you'll be.
You said something much earlier in the show about when you first started writing comedy material, you wanted to be a stand-up comic and it wasn't working. Is that actually a good suggestion for people who write comedy to go out there and test the material in that way?
I don't know if it's the best use of time for most people because it's a tough life stand up. You go out, you put your name on a list at 7 o'clock, and then at 2 in the morning you might get 3 minutes. But I found it was good for meeting comedians and meeting comics and actors and working with talent. And I've worked with a lot of talent, and you learn by being in the situations how to talk with a funny person, talk with talent. And I know it sounds strange, but these guys, funny comedians, are really unique individuals. And if you can speak their language, then when they get their series and they get their movie deal, they're going to call you to write their movie for them. And that happened with me, a few times.
And they're very, very accessible at these clubs. Actually, Bill Maher was in my first 2 low-budget films because I used to hang out, David, at all these different clubs, not one, but multiple clubs, where they were cycling through to get that free stage time to get their name on all those different lists every different night of the week. And it was David Spade, and it was, a lot of the names that went on to be, pretty significant comedians, but they weren't at the time, and they're very accessible. And I think it's like everything, you grow generationally with the people that you hang out with.
Yes.
Very, very good suggestion. Great question, Bethan.
Gary, I think you need to untie David from his chair. We're almost out of time here.
I'm not willing.
I'm not going to.
I reject that idea. So we actually will, David, this one time, on condition you promise to come back and hang out with us at Breaking Into Hollywood again sometime in the not distant future.
Sure, I'd love to. This is great.
Cool. This is so wonderful. Thank you, Emil. This is such great nuggets. I love this conversation, and you bring good game, my friend.
Thank you. You do too. Both of you guys.
Send our regards to Stacy too, please. She was so lovely last week.
Oh, perfect. I will. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, wonderful. David, you have a beautiful night, and thanks for sharing with us.
Talk to you soon. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. So, Bethan, we have definitely pushed right up against the hour, haven't we?
We absolutely have. 3 minutes. He's absolutely lovely. Do you know what is so weird to me is that there's such a perception in Hollywood of such idiots. Having worked there myself, I know there are a bunch of idiots, right? But there are so many good people too. And I think if you're a good person, you're drawn to these people. And that's you, Gary. You are, without sitting here trying to kiss your butt, you're one of the most honest, true people I've ever met. And look at the kind of people that you attract around you. It's fascinating. It's fabulous.
Yeah, I would say, thank you, Bethan. I would say that in general, and it is a big generalization, but the people who are naturally drawn truly, not for fame, not for the wrong reason, but for the right reason, because they're really inspired to be a creative professional and they know they have to commit and they have to walk that path to really hone those skills. Those people who are storytellers in their soul, they're just interesting people. I do think that unfortunately there are some other types, and it's the old, what's the old saying? Not the squeaky wheel, but one bad can ruin the barrel. It as a perception, right? I think there's a lot of people who think people in Hollywood or from Hollywood, whatever that means, are annoying and divas and egotistical, and sure it happens. But you know what? Breaking into Hollywood is proof. My whole life really is breaking into the outgrowth of my love of this and all the relationships and wanting to share a lot of that. We will never run out of guests, and every one of them will be like we've had Michael, Christopher, Stacy, David. These people are impeccable and brilliant, and they care, and they're fun. So it's great to share ideas with them, and we're just going to keep on.
I think what really, really came through with the audience on this one was the age thing, and I absolutely love that he backed that up with saying that it doesn't matter. Age is not a restriction if you want to be a writer. Would love to talk more about that. We actually have a special hangout tomorrow night to teach everyone how to use Google Plus to your advantage. Google Plus is an amazing, it's like Alice in Wonderland rabbit warren. You have no idea what this thing can do for you. But while we're building the community, and lots of you who are watching tonight have been joining in the community, we were talking all weekend in there, you guys are going to be able to work with each other. So I just saw somebody say, would somebody mind reading a script? You're going to be able to contact each other. We're going to show you how you can do these hangouts that are private. You're going to be able to really bolster each other up while you're going through the Breaking into Hollywood Master Course. And tomorrow night we're doing that show at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, and I think that's going to be so helpful for everybody, Gary, don't you?
Yes, and by the way, so much so that I am going to be there. Absolutely, I wouldn't miss it. This is, Bethan, you've taken me to school. I thought I was reasonably, not sophisticated, but active in social media generally. Probably a little bit ahead of the curve when I did the Kickstarter campaign. I had to learn so much. But I have learned such an appreciation for this amazing world that I really didn't know deeply, which is Google Plus and in all its aspects, and how Google Plus ties together with YouTube, and how you're rewarded, the karma wheel of it, all these things that you've taken me to school around. So tomorrow night is a treasure chest of really useful information for anyone on this call, and I recommend you reach out to some friends because you're going to treat them to something special if you invite them to join us as well. We're also going to be scheduling, actually we didn't have time, we won't do it tonight, Bethan, but we're going to be announcing soon for those of you who are in the Master Course, Breaking into Hollywood, the Master Course, we will be announcing shortly a date in the coming weeks to have our first private hangout where Bethan and I will be spending time with people who are in the midst of that course, whether they're in Module 1 or 3 or 4, wherever they are in the course, and rolling up our sleeves and digging in deeper to really solve some problems and answer some questions personally. So we'll announce that very shortly.
That's really cool because you will be in the room like I am with Gary, although you can't see me right now. You'll be in the room with Gary, being able to ask your questions directly to him, and what more could you want? That's fantastic. So that will be for the first group of people who have signed up for Breaking into Hollywood, the Master Course. So should we talk more about that tomorrow night, Gary?
Let's talk about that. Let's do that tomorrow night. Absolutely. Okay. And look, we're so excited about what we're doing. I mean, this is such a joy, and we really would implore you to ask. If you know friends who are so inclined and think they'd get value out of this, have them throw their name in Breaking into Hollywood into the email list, because we love staying. We're going to be sending out lots of cool stuff, but we like staying in touch and inviting people to join us. So if that makes sense, have at it. The more the merrier. This is a party we want to keep growing.
Okay, cool. I'd like to say one more thing. If you're on right now, if you're watching, you're on the Breaking into Hollywood Google Plus page. On the right, you'll see communities, and there's a Breaking into Hollywood community. Alethea, if you're still with us, maybe you could post a link to the community in the comments here, because what we've done is I've built introduce yourself, what you're interested in, what you need help with, where do you live. So we're all starting to interact, get to know each other, and I really do think some amazing collaborations are going to come out of this, because you guys are all here for the same reason. You want to break into Hollywood, so where better to do it than as a community together.
Yeah, that is definitely a part of our...
way over, Gary. You want to say goodnight?
Yeah, I want to say goodnight, but I thank you for that, because that's definitely a key part of the value system that drives us to do this, that's part of Breaking into Hollywood. So yes, this is not just about us, this is about us as community together. Big difference. So we're way over the hour. We apologize for hanging you up. Have a beautiful evening, and thank you, and come back tomorrow night.
Thank you. Night, everybody.
Thanks, Beth, and thanks, everyone.